from one of the most powerful Arabic tribes. She was a great warrior, skilled with horses and the sword, a woman of courage, a woman of valor. She proved this when she came forward to defend the prophet, her nephew, when the men left him abandoned on the battlefield. Join Ustada lailanasheeba as she details the story of Safiyya bint Abdul Mutalib, the aunt of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Series entitled Heroines of Islam, the Heroines of Islam. And of all the series that I personally teach, this is the most provocative of them all. It takes a lot to go over the story of these female companions, because these female companions are the role models for each and every one of us Muslim women, because they are our examples. There is nothing that we encounter in this world today that these women have not already encountered. Even the question that was asked before class about impotency. And I want to talk about that for a moment. I want everyone to understand that when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam rose up to prophethood, this was during one of the most tumultuous times in humans' history. These were the dark ages. This was the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th century. This is when the earth was at its worst. That's why it's called the medieval dark ages. Christianity had come and gone, left the people wanting. Judaism came and gone way before that. These were days in which the people had lost their hope. They've lost direction. The world was filled with nothing but pillage. It was all about power. It was all about taking over, taking away from those who were less than you. And women had no rights during those days. The 6th, the 7th, the 8th, the 9th century, women had no rights whatsoever. So these were terrible times in man's history. And I tell you, sisters, all the time, to be a woman during the 6th, 7th, 8th century, you had to know how to survive, because women were viewed as nothing but property. The world was nothing but pillage and take from who you can take from. Women were the collateral, and so were children. If a town raided another town, whoever was the victor not only received possession of everything in the town, but the women and children too. The women and children who survived were divided up amongst the men. They were taken by the men as slaves. You had to be beautiful back then. If you were not a beautiful woman, or if you were an old woman, you were executed. They would just kill you because there was no purpose for you. But if you were young and beautiful, you would be sold into slavery. You'd either be a woman who they'd prostitute for money, whether you liked it or not, or you'd be a man's bed mate, a slave to a man, his concubine, his bad mate. And the same with the children, believe it or not. The children would be sold into slavery too. If it was a strong boy, he'd be a slave. He'd be worked as a slave. If it was a girl, she'd be given away to be prostituted, to be somebody's bed chambermaid. They called them chambermaids back then. That's what the prostituted, the women who were kept as the war booty, they were chambermaids. Okay? So these were horrific times for women. So for those people who lived during those centuries, the 6th, 7th, and 8th century, many of them, if they gave birth to a girl, they would kill her, bury the baby alive. This was done by everyone, not just Arabs. The Vikings, they would take the girl and throw her off a cliff. A girl baby and throw her off the cliff. The Romans would smash her head up against a cliff. The Persians stick a spear right through her. Because again, women were of no value back in those centuries. Okay? So to survive, you had to know how to fight. So if a couple gave birth to a girl baby and they wanted to keep her, they would train her. She was trained to fight. The Vikings trained their daughters to fight as soon as they could walk. The Romans trained their daughters to fight as soon as they could walk. The Greeks, the Arabs, the Persians, even the Europeans who existed then, they trained their daughters to fight. Because that was the time back then. If she couldn't fight, she'd be lost. And also another thing that's important, and I'm setting the pace because you guys are going to see a lot of people listen to my lectures and some people have the nerve to say, Layla, making it up, when I ain't making up nothing. Just because you've never been taught the truth doesn't mean that the truth is a lie, because all the hadiths I use come from out of Bukhari. It's all right there in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim. All you got to do is learn how to read and ask Allah to give you reading comprehension skills. It's not my fault that all the hadiths about women have been skipped over by many of your teachers because they don't want you to see how strong the Arabic women were. They don't want you to know how resilient the women were. They do not want you to know that the women were on the battlefield with the men. They were not at home making babies and having babies. Because people didn't even live to see the age of 30 back then. Life was short. And being conquered by a stronger tribe happened all the time. So they took each day, day by day, and they thanked Allah for another day. But they never stopped training and preparing themselves for the unexpected war that could come at any time. So it's not my fault that when you guys learned your religion, all the hadiths that speak about women were skipped over. That's why you got to find a good teacher who ain't going to just teach you what he wants you to know, but to sit down and go through those hadith books telling you what you need to know. Okay? So women back in the 6th, 7th, and 8th century, if a female child was allowed to live, she was trained to take care of herself. And the ones that couldn't be trained, You'll find this out, especially with the European women. For the women that couldn't be trained because they were just didn't catch on to it, they didn't have the heart for it, they became masters in poison. Did y'all know that? Masters of poison. That's a lot of European history. The princesses, the queens walked around with poison on them so that should an attack break out, they could slip poison into the drink of their captor. And in many cases, the women would drink the poison themselves, because many queens and princesses said they'd rather die than be a slave. The same with the Arab women. For those women that couldn't fight, but there weren't that many, because all Arab women were trained. It was just their culture. When I did the story of Sauda radiallahu anha was 60 years old, but what did Aisha say? Aisha said Sauda put everybody to shame on that battlefield. Sauda would pick up a sword and a pole and would put everybody to shame. That hadith is Bukhari. I don't know where y'all get this stuff thinking that these companions didn't fight, that the women weren't fighting. Yes, they helped on the battlefield with water and nursing, but they also fought. That came with it. Because I'd rather die fighting with my sword than to end up a slave to someone and passed around and prostituted. I would have made the same choice too. If I were living back in those days, I'd be the same way. Hand me that sword, hand me a knife. I'd go out that way than be somebody's bed maid or chamber maid, as they called it back then. That's history. Well, today I'm going to give you guys the story of one of the best heroines of Islam. She was the sister of one of the best warriors of the Quraysh. She was also the aunt of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Let's put the PowerPoint up on the screen, and I want you guys to take notes. And we're going to put to rest this misconception that many of you have that the women were sitting at home somewhere. I don't know where this comes from. And the Arabic sisters here, they tell me, Layla, I can't believe the women in the West believe that stuff. You know, I have a lot of Arabic women who come and listen to my classes. They help me with some of this stuff. And they're shocked at how the Muslim women in the West are not taught these things. You know, subhanAllah. So let's share this, but let me first screen share. And by the way, for those of you, wait a minute, hold on, guys. Who's the host? Me? Okay, hold on. Hold on, guys. Let me do this. I have to give myself access, which I don't know how to do because I can't open this up. Give me a second. Where's Layla's other account? Okay. All right, hold on. It's me. Okay, here I go now. Let's try this again. Oh, wow. Okay. So the people here in Zoom, you guys are going to see, this is Trovo. So you guys can watch through Trovo so I can keep my eye on what's going on in there, because they say a lot of crazy stuff. That's Trovo. For anybody that's on Trovo, that way I can see what's going on, since y'all say it's some crazy people coming in there. Okay. And now for everybody here, the rest of you, watch the waterfall while I put the PowerPoint up. And we'll Get started now. Allow.
Yes, do take it off, Sister Lena.
What? What take what? Oh, what's on? Wait a minute. Let me.
The Sunnahfollowers at the top and then bottom.
Okay, well, let me log on first because I can't do but one thing. Let's see. Where am I at? I'm here. I don't want to get confused. Hold on. Okay, let me make this big screen for everybody. Wait a minute. Okay, that's large screen. And where's the design? All right. Okay, everybody, inshallah, can see my PowerPoint. And Trovo people, I see you guys too. I got my eye on you, Trove. What's this? I don't know what that is, but it's in my way. Okay. All right, let's go to the beginning. Put it on slideshow from the beginning. Okay, everybody can see. So tonight we're going to do the story of one of the great heroines of Islam. Her name was Safiyya. Safiyya, the daughter of Abdul Mutallib. Safiyya, the daughter of Abdul Mutallib, radiyallahu anha. Let's talk about her. She was the mother of Zubayr ibn al-Awan, who was one of the eminent companions, and she was the sister of Hamza, the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad. So she was the Prophet Muhammad's aunt, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In fact, they say that she was the only aunt from his father's side who converted to Islam and migrated. And just like I did the story yesterday of Aisha, radiyallahu anha's mother, Ruman, a lot of the Arabic girls were trained to be excellent horsewomen, okay? And they were always trained at birth to be warriors because, again, the Arabs were no different than the Vikings. They were a warrior race of people. And if they decided to keep a girl alive, she had to know how to defend herself in case the tribe was attacked, and she wouldn't end up, somebody's a bed slave. So when Hamza was trained, because Hamza was her brother, they trained her with him. She was his sister. Just as Hamza was an excellent warrior and swordsman, and Hamza was also an excellent horseman, so was she. She could command a horse and she could wield a sword. And just like her brother Hamza, she had a strong personality. Many people, men and women, were intimidated by her, because her character was strong. She didn't fear nobody. So a lot of people thought she was mean and harsh because she spoke with such authority. Remember, I told you back in those days, the women had to flaunt their authority if they came from a noble family. She came from a noble family. She had to let them know, I am just as good as Hamza. So she carried herself with authority, just like Khadija, radiyallahu anha, did. Remember, we talked about Khadija, the mother of the believers. Khadija came from a noble family too. Khadija carried herself with dignity, nobility. She was a force to be reckoned with, and so was Safiyya. I don't make this stuff up, guys. This is how a woman survived back then. You couldn't survive unless you were strong. Okay? When Safiyya was young, she was promised in marriage to a man named Al-Harith ibn Umayyah. That name should be familiar to you. Remember, back in those days, if you came from a noble family, the girls were promised in marriage at birth to other dignified men. Well, she was promised in marriage to Al-Harith ibn Umayyah. Who was he? He was Abu Sufyan's brother. She married him, but he died before they could have any children. And like I told you, women didn't remain single back then. Even though she was a woman of affluence, a woman still was nothing without a man behind her. So, and being that she came from a noble tribe, she was married quickly to Al-Awam ibn Kuwailid. That name should be familiar. Who was he? He was the brother of Khadijah radiallahu anha. So now do y'all see? We talked yesterday about how Aisha's mother, Ruman, was good friends with Khadijah. Well, now you can see Safiyya was close friends with her too. Because again, Khadijah, her brother was the husband of Safiyya. And Safiyya had two children by him, As-Saib and Az-Zubayr. You guys know about Az-Zubayr. But he didn't live long either. He died. But after he died, Safiyya devoted all her attention to her two sons, especially Az-Zubayr, the younger one. You know, she spent her time trying to raise them to be men. And being that she came from a wealthy tribe, a wealthy family, money wasn't no problem for her. And so she was able to devote her time to her sons. She wanted them to be tough because, as I tell you guys all the time, in this era of history, only the strong survive. If you were weak, you wouldn't have made it in the 6th, 7th, 8th century. Only the strong. Her youngest son, Az-Zubayr, he wasn't as strong as his older brother. Sometimes he would come home complaining to his mother of how the other kids bullied him. She would get angry. She would admonish him, and she would tie him up and beat him to make him strong. And by the way, guys, this was very common. If you learn history, Google through how life was in the 6th, 7th, and 8th century. Boys had to be made strong. The Arabs would do this. The Vikings, you know what they would do to a boy who wasn't strong enough? They'd strip him of all his clothes and make him stand in an icy lake of water for as long as he could. So this was common. Okay, very common. They would beat the boy to make him tough, to make him not be a crybaby. The Romans, they would send their boys out hunting for lions, tigers, wolves, and they better come back with a wolf or with a tiger skin. So this was common back in those days. This was not oppressive. This was not a child abuser. This was the way the world was then. So when Az-Zubayr would come home crying, she'd tie him up and whip him to toughen him up. One day, when she was whipping him, one of the members of her husband's family, remember her husband had died, he happened to walk by and saw her whipping her son. And he said, can't you be a little bit nicer to him? Remember, he's an orphan. You know, his father died, because in Islam, a child is an orphan if he has no father. He said his father's not here. So let the boy, can you give him a break? She told him, don't tell me how to raise my son. She said, I'm going to make a man out of him. I'm going to make him grow up to be a man who will never be defeated by anyone else. He will be a man who will never surrender to any of Allah's creatures. That's how tough she was. And that's what she really was doing. We have this authentic hadith, and you'll find this hadith in Sahih Muslim. It's reported that one day when Zubayr was older, he got into a duel with somebody who slandered him and tried to tease him. Zubayr was so strong that he broke the man's hand and beat him up almost to the point of killing him. Now, Safiyya was not just a warrior, but just like most women back then also were nurses. They would also help take care of the sick. When this man was beaten up, he was taken to Safiyya for her to nurse him. She said, "Oh my God, what happened to him?" And they told her, "Your son, Zubayr, did this to him." And when they told her that, she smiled and she began to recite the following poem. She said, "Now tell me, how did you find Zubayr? Did you find him like a cottage cheese? Or did you find him to be like a date fruit? Or did you find him to be like a falcon? He is not as simple to overcome or beat as easy food that can be eaten effortlessly." So in other words, she was saying, yeah, y'all talked about how I was too harsh on him. Y'all complained that I was abusing him too much. Now look at my son. Look at my son. He's undefeatable. Subhanallah. And that's what she wanted. She always wanted him to grow up to be strong in body and in soul. This is a warrior. She was a warrior. Okay? Zubayr, he grew up, and guess what, guys? We talked about him in another class. He accepted Islam before her. Safiyya didn't embrace Islam as quickly as her friends did. She didn't embrace Islam like Khadija did and like Ruman and them did. She stood upon the religion of her forefathers for a while. In fact, Zubayr, when he became Muslim, he used to go to his mother and argue with her to try to convince her to convert. And it would bother her that he took on this new religion, but there was nothing she could do to make him change his mind because he was now a man. And by the way, I want y'all to look at this picture. This is a picture that I dug up off the internet. This is how the women dressed back in the 6th and 7th and 8th century. The Arabic women, because they were warriors, they had to fight. They wore hooded cloaks like this. Okay? Hooded cloaks like this. And they had their swords and stuff attached to them. So that's why I picked this picture to give y'all an idea. And this is also how other women, the Roman women, dressed similar to this too. And so did the Persians and the Vikings too. But the Vikings had wool because it was colder where they were. But this is how the women had to roll back then, because you never knew when you was going to be attacked. And Safiyya was a horsewoman. She could work with horses. Okay? So Safiyya radiallahu anha, she did not embrace Islam for a while. In fact, she did not embrace Islam until the day her brother Hamza did. When Hamza came back into Mecca and heard that his nephew was a prophet, he accepted it. And when she heard that her brother accepted Islam, that's when she accepted it too, because her and Hamza were close. Just like when I did the story of Salama. Salama and Khalid bin Walid were first cousins. They were like brother and sister. Salama was trained with Hamza. That's how the girls were. The girls were trained with the men because, again, the women had to know how to defend themselves. So just like Salama and Khalid bin Walid were trained together, so was Safiyya and Hamza, and there was a closeness that developed. There was a closeness that would develop between the woman and who she trained with. Safiyya was very close to Hamza, as Salama was very close to Khalid bin Walid. Okay? So when Hamza converted to Islam, she said, well, it must be true. She converted too. And there's a lot of hadiths that are mentioned about how good a person, good a woman Safiyya was. But the thing that I want to focus on, she had a lot of good characteristics. But what I chose to focus on, I want to focus on the warrior aspect of her, because I am so sick and tired of Western women, you Western women, thinking that Arabic women were pushovers. You Western women allowing the men to come to your countries and feed you garbage about being a woman that's not true. Making you think that women served no purpose, we're invisible. Muslim women were never invisible. Safiyya was never invisible, just like Salama was never invisible. Neither was Aisha, neither was Hafsa, neither was Khadija. Okay? And what I'm going to focus on first for you guys is the Battle of the Trench. And by the way, you will find all these hadiths that speak about her in Bukhari, in Muslim, Muwatta, Tirmidhi. They're in all the Sittah. But the ones I'm mentioning can be found in Bukhari, Muslim, and Muwatta. Okay? So during the Battle of the Trench, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if you guys remember, Mukhtar talked about it with you guys. When the Battle of the Trench occurred, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had the trench built around Medina, and he had the women and children put inside a fortress to protect them from the Quraysh and the Qurayza Jews. Now, Safiyya was a warrior. She was angry. She didn't like being put in no fortress. Neither did Salama. Neither did any of the women. I'm going to be honest. None of the women liked being put in that fortress because they had been used to being on the battlefield fighting before Islam. Before Islam, they were always on the battlefield. But now here comes the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, giving women rights, which are good. But what comes along with those rights is the man's going to protect you now. So anyway, the women were put in this fortress known as Fari, and the Prophet appointed Hassan ibn Thabit. He appointed Ibn Thabit to look after the women. In fact, he told him, do not join the fight. Your job is to stand outside the fortress and guard the women. Listen to what Safiyya said. She tells us this in her own words, and you can find this hadith in Bukhari. She said, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam went out to the Battle of the Trench, he put the women of his family in a fortress called Fari, and he assigned Hassan ibn Thabit to look out after us. A Jewish man walked by. And he climbed the fortress until he saw us in there. So I yelled out, I said, Hassan, Hassan, come and kill this man. But Hassan wouldn't. He said, no, the prophet told me to just watch you women and not do anything else. So I stood up, I grabbed my sword and I took off his head. She took her sword and cut the man's head off. And after she cut his head off, she told Hassan, she said, Hassan, I've killed him. Take his head and drag it to the Jews so they can see that we are armed in here, so they can see what fate they will meet if they try to come through this window. But again, Hassan ibn Thabit swore by Allah that he wouldn't do it because the prophet told him to just stand guard. So Safiyya said, I picked up his head that I took off his shoulders and I threw it out the window at the Jews. And when the Jews saw the head of their man come falling down upon them, they said, wow, this man would never leave his family without someone to guard them. So what did they do? They ran away. This is a warrior. This is a warrior. So where do you Muslim women in America and the United Kingdom and the rest of the world think that Arabic women are these lick the pus people? And by the way, I want y'all to take a look at this picture here. This is another picture that I dug up off the internet. Not only did the women fight with swords, but I want y'all to look what's on her hands. There's a lot of tombs and graves that they uncover, and they would find this sharp stuff on the woman's nails. Look at this. The women, the Arabic women, would take pieces of metal and sharpen them, and they would put them on their fingers, and they would use it to stab a man. That's how warriors these women were. They were warriors. Okay? Warriors. Warriors in the way of Allah. Like I said, Arabic women were never invisible. Muslim women are not invisible. Subhanallah. So this shows how Safiyya, may Allah be pleased with her, she had strong character, strong personality. She was indeed a true warrior of Allah. She didn't fear anyone or anything but Allah. And she stepped up to the plate when the man wouldn't. Hello. Also, she not only served a great service there, but listen to what happened. I'm sure you guys remember what happened at the Battle of Uhud. On the day of the Battle of Uhud, she had more than one remarkable input. Again, she was never invisible. When the people felt defeated because the archers had left their spot, she moved forward. Listen to what Urwa says, and this hadith is authentic too, Bukhari and Muslim. He says Safiyya came forward on the day of the Battle of Uhud while the Muslims were vanquished. She came forward holding a spear in her hand, and she began to strike the faces. See, she was a fighter, a warrior. She began to hit the faces of the polytheists with her sword. When the Prophet ﷺ saw her, he called out to her son to grab her because he loved her. That was his auntie, and he was afraid that she might get hurt. But when Safiyya heard that her brother Hamza, whom she loved dearly, was killed, there was no stopping her. She wanted to see his dead body. So she grabbed her sword, ran out on the battlefield, striking down every man that came in her way. And when she stood over her fallen brother and saw how he was mutilated, how his stomach was cut open, how his nose and ears were cut off, she said, that's when Zubayr told her mother, go back. The prophet said, go back. That's when she told her son, subhanallah. She said, why should I leave and go back when my brother has been mutilated in the way of Allah? We are not pleased with what has happened, but I will bear this with patience, and I hope to get the reward from Allah. And so then she went back. And this is when the archers, guys, that's when the archers abandoned their post. Remember during the Battle of Uhud? They abandoned their posts and ran out to the battlefield trying to seek the spoils of war. And they left the Prophet Muhammad standing alone with no protection. It was Umara, another woman. I'm going to do her story next week. Amara and her sons ran out to protect him, and Safiyya ran out with a sword and a javelin, and they surrounded the prophet and dared anyone to come near him until Abu Bakr and Ali joined. So she played two great roles during the Battle of Uhud. And they tell you that the Muslim women didn't participate in battles. How did they skip over these hadiths? These hadiths are in Bukhari and Muslim. How did they skip over them? Okay. Her and Amara, they surrounded the prophet. She had a sword and a javelin, and she dared anyone. She was already upset with the murder of her brother. She dared any of them to come near the prophet. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay. Also, Safiyya was present when the prophet died, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Even though she was very attached to her nephew, her faith remained strong. But she did say this about him at his death. She said, many occurrences have taken place after you. If you were alive and had been witness to them, calamities would not have reached such a proportion. You see, this is what she said after he had died, when the fitna began. Because remember, after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam died, that's when the Muslims began all this fitna and stuff. So she said, many occurrences have happened after you. If you were living and had witnessed them, this stuff wouldn't have happened. Also, we have a hadith where she said, the day we miss the prophet is here. Oh, eyes, shed tears. The day of your death is certainly a day in which the sun is wrapped up in darkness through its shining. And all the historians of Islam say that these are the words that she said. You know, this is after his death, when times got bad. Okay. Safiyya, radiyallahu anha, the aunt of the prophet, the sister of Hamza, she lived until the caliphate of Umar. Nobody knows for sure when she died, but she died sometime during the caliphate of Umar. So she witnessed a lot of stuff. She witnessed a lot of things happen. And that's why, she made those statements. She would often be heard making statements like that. If my nephew were here still, then none of this would happen. Okay. All right. So that's the story. I'm putting the PowerPoint down so y'all can see me. That's the story of Safiyya, radiyallahu anha, the aunt of the Prophet Muhammad. And again, when y'all hear these famous men talking about Muslim women, being invisible, Ask them what Muslim women. You tell them, because if you look at the history of Islam, there is nothing. There were Muslim women involved in everything. They were involved with every battle. They were involved at the masjids. There's no chapter of any hadith that's not book that doesn't mention something about the Muslim women. They were active. So why is it that these men today want you Western women to think that you're supposed to be invisible? Maybe you women will be invisible. Lailanasheeba will never be invisible. All right. I'm going to stop right here. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Are there